Hey everyone, welcome to the BookTubePrize channel. My name is Robert, and I'm back today with another list of 10 new books that have been sent to me by publishers. Today's books are all nonfiction for the nonfiction category. I'll just give you the publishers' descriptions of these books. These are all ones that the publishers have sent for consideration for next year's BookTube Prize. So while we're in the middle of the semifinals round this year, I'll share with you some of the books that I've received. Okay, the first book is The Artful Dickens by John Mullan, The Tricks and Ploys of the Great Novelist. Discover the tricks of a literary master in this essential guide to the fictional world of Charles Dickens. From Pickwick to Scrooge, Copperfield to Twist, how did Dickens find the perfect names for his characters? What was Dickens' favorite way of killing his characters? When is a Dickens character most likely to see a ghost? Why is Dickens' trickery only fully realized when his novels are read aloud? In 13 entertaining and wonderfully insightful essays, John Mullan explores the literary machinations of Dickens' eccentric genius, from his delight in cliches to his rendering of smells and his outrageous use of coincidences. A treat for all lovers of Dickens, this vibrant compendium puts his audacity, originality, and brilliance on full display. The next one is Shooting Midnight Cowboy, Art, Sex, Loneliness, Liberation, and the Making of a Dark Classic by Glenn Frankel. After Darling was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, the British director John Schlesinger found himself the toast of Hollywood. Expectations for his next film, an expensive Panavision adaptation of Far from the Madding Crowd, were huge. But the movie was a critical and commercial failure, and Schlesinger suddenly found himself persona non grata in the world of American cinema that had once welcomed him with open arms. Given his recent travails, Schlesinger's next project seemed doubly daring, bordering on foolish. James Leo Herlihy's novel Midnight Cowboy, about a Texas hustler trying to survive on the mean streets of 1960s New York, was dark and transgressive. Perhaps something about the book's unsparing portrait of cultural alienation resonated with Schlesinger. His decision to film it began one of the unlikelier stories in cinematic history, centered on a city that seemed, at first glance, as unwelcoming as Herlihy's novel itself. Glenn Frankel's Shooting Midnight Cowboy tells the story of a modern classic that by all accounts should never have become one in the first place. The film's boundary-pushing subject matter, homosexuality, prostitution, sexual assault, earned it an X rating when it first appeared in cinemas in 1969. For Midnight Cowboy, Schlesinger enlisted Jerome Hellman, a producer coming off his own recent flop, and Waldo Salt, a formerly blacklisted screenwriter with a tortured past. The decision to shoot on location in New York at a time when the city was approaching its gritty nadir backfired when a sanitation strike filled Manhattan with garbage fires and fears of dysentery. Much more than a history of Schlesinger's film, Shooting Midnight Cowboy is an arresting glimpse into the world from which it emerged, a troubled city that nurtured the talents and ambitions of the pioneering Polish cinematographer Adam Hollander and the legendary casting director Marian Doherty, who discovered both Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight and supported them for the roles of Ratso Rizzo and Joe Buck, leading to one of the most intensely moving joint performances ever to appear on screen. We follow Herlihy himself as he moves from the experimental confines of Black Mountain College to the theaters of Broadway, influenced by close relationships with Tennessee Williams and Anais Nin, and yet unable to find lasting literary success. By turns madcap and serious, and enriched by interviews with Hoffman, Voight, and others, Shooting Midnight Cowboy is not only the definitive account of the film that unleashed a new wave of innovation in American cinema, but also the story of a country and an industry beginning to break free from decades of cultural and sexual repression. The next one is called The Free World, Art and Thought in the Cold War by Louis Menand. When the Second World War ended, the United States enjoyed an enormous material advantage over the rest of the world, but it was not yet a fully liberal society or a serious actor in cultural affairs. Discriminatory barriers would fall, and the United States would move from the periphery to the center of an increasingly international world of art and ideas. The Free World is the story of how this happened. Louis Menand analyzes the economic, demographic, and technological forces that drove social and cultural change, and he introduces us to the personalities at the center of this transformation: George Kennan and Hans Morgenthau, Hannah Arendt and David Reisman, Lee Krasner, Jackson Pollock, and Clement Greenberg, Lionel Trilling, Allen Ginsberg, and Jack Kerouac, James Baldwin and Martin Luther King Jr., Amiri Baraka and Malcolm X, Betty Friedan, Susan Sontag, and Maria Irene Fournier, Elvis Presley and Alan Freed, John Cage and Robert Rauschenberg, Andy Warhol and Leo Castelli, Tom Hayden, Casey Hayden, and C. Wright Mills, Pauline Kael and Dwight MacDonald. And Menand shows how artists and thinkers in other countries, from Simone de Beauvoir, Claude Lévi-Strauss, and Jacques Derrida, to D.T. Suzuki, John Lennon, and Jean-Luc Godard, exerted a powerful influence on post-war art and thought. It was a time when people cared, a time when painting mattered, movies mattered, and poetry mattered, and when ideas like liberty and authenticity were promoted and transformed. It was an exciting period of creative innovation and intellectual debate, and it gave birth to the United States we know today. The next one is called Places of Mind, A Life of Edward Said by Timothy Brennan. Both controversial and beloved, Edward Said was the pioneer of post-colonial studies, a tireless champion for his native Palestine, and an erudite literary critic whose books, namely Orientalism, continue to impact students and thinkers today. In Places of Mind, Timothy Brennan, who studied under Said and remained a friend until Said's death in 2003, provides the first complete biography of his thesis advisor, who emerges as a self-doubting, tender, eloquent advocate of literature's dramatic effects on politics and civic life. Charting the intertwined routes of Said's intellectual development, Places of Mind reveals him to be a brilliant iconoclast, a cajoler and strategist, a New York intellectual with a foot in Beirut, an orchestra impresario in Weimar and Ramallah, a raconteur on national television, a Palestinian negotiator at the State Department, and an actor in films in which he played himself. Brennan traces the Arab influences on Said's thinking along with the tutelage by Lebanese statesmen, offbeat modernist auteurs, and New York literati as Said grew into a scholar whose writings changed the face of university life forever. With both intimidating intellect and charm, Said melded these teachings into a groundbreaking and influential counter-tradition of radical humanism set against the backdrop of techno-scientific dominance and religious war. With unparalleled clarity, he gave the humanities a new authority in the age of Reaganism, one that continues today. Drawing on the testimony of family, friends, students, and antagonists alike, and aided by FBI files and Said's unpublished writings, drafts of novels, and personal letters, Places of Mind synthesizes Said's intellectual breadth and influence into an unprecedented, intimate, and compelling portrait of one of the great minds of the 20th century. The next one is called Albert and the Whale, Albrecht Dürer and How Art Imagines Our World by Philip Hoare. Albrecht Dürer changed the way we see nature through art. From his prints in 1498 of the plague-ridden apocalypse, the first works mass-produced by any artist, to his hyper-real images of animals and plants, Dürer's art is a revelation. It is a vision that remains startlingly powerful and seductive even now. In Albert and the Whale, Philip Hoare sets out to discover why Dürer's art endures. He encounters medieval alchemists and modernist poets, eccentric emperors and queer soul rebels, ambassadorial whales and enigmatic pop artists. He witnesses the miraculous birth of Durer's fantastical rhinoceros and his hermaphroditic hare, and he traces the fate of the star-crossed Leviathan that the artist pursued. As the author swims from Europe to America and beyond, these prophetic artists and downed angels provoke eternal questions. What is natural or unnatural? Is art a fatal contract? Or does it, in fact, have the power to save us? With its wild and watery adventures, its witty accounts of amazing cultural lives, and its delight in the fragile beauty of the natural world, Albert and the Whale offers glorious and inspiring insights into a great artist and his unerring, sometimes disturbing, gaze. The next one is called Pop Song, Adventures in Art and Intimacy by Larissa Pham. Like a song that feels written just for you, Larissa Pham's debut work of nonfiction captures the imagination and refuses to let go. Pop Song is a book about distances, near and far, the miles we travel to get away from ourselves, or those who hurt us, and the impossible gaps that can exist between two people sharing a bed. Plumbing the well of culture for clues and patterns about love and loss, from Agnes Martin's abstract paintings to James Turrell's transcendent light works, and Anne Carson's Eros the Bittersweet to Frank Ocean's Blonde, Pham writes of her youthful attempts to find meaning in travel, sex, drugs, and art before sensing that she might need to turn her gaze upon herself. There is heartache in these pages, but Pham's electric ways of seeing create a perfectly fractured portrait of modern intimacy that is triumphant in its vulnerability and restlessness. Pop Song is a book about all the routes by which we might escape our own needs before finally finding a way home. The next one is called Every Body, a book about freedom by Olivia Laing. The body is a source of pleasure and of pain, at once hopelessly vulnerable and radiant with power. In her ambitious, brilliant sixth book, Olivia Laing charts an electrifying course through the long struggle for bodily freedom, using the life of the renegade psychoanalyst Wilhelm Reich to explore gay rights and sexual liberation, feminism, and the civil rights movement. Drawing on her own experiences in protest and alternative medicine, and traveling from Weimar Berlin to the prisons of McCarthy-era America, Laing grapples with some of the most significant and complicated figures of the past century, among them Nina Simone, Christopher Isherwood, Andrea Dworkin, Sigmund Freud, Susan Sontag, and Malcolm X. Despite its many burdens, the body remains a source of power, even in an era as technologized and automated as our own. Arriving at a moment in which basic bodily rights are once again imperiled, Everybody is an investigation into the forces arranged against freedom and a celebration of how ordinary human bodies can resist oppression and reshape the world. The next one is called Spilt Milk, Memoirs by Courtney Zoffness. In her literary debut, internationally award-winning writer Courtney Zoffness considers what we inherit from generations past, biologically, culturally, spiritually, and what we pass on to our children. Spilt Milk is an intimate, bracing, and beautiful exploration of vulnerability and culpability. Zoffness relives her childhood anxiety disorder as she witnesses it manifest in her firstborn, endures brazen sexual advances by a student in her class, grapples with the implications of her young son's cop obsession, and challenges her Jewish faith. What role does a mother play, she asks, in raising thoughtful, generous children? Where is the line between privacy and secrecy? And how do the stories we tell inform who we become? These powerful, dynamic essays herald a vital new voice. The next one is called Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul? Essays by Jessie McCarthy. Ranging from Ta-Nehisi Coates' case for reparations, to Toni Morrison's revolutionary humanism, to D'Angelo's simmering blend of R&B and racial justice, Jesse McCarthy's bracing essays investigate with virtuosic intensity the art, music, literature, and political stances that have defined the 21st century. Even as our world suffered through successive upheavals, McCarthy contends something was happening in the world of culture, a surging and unprecedented visibility at every level of black art making. Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul reckons with this resurgence, arguing for the central role of art and intellectual culture in an age of widening inequality and moral crisis. McCarthy reinvigorates the essay form as a space not only for argument, but for experimental writing that mixes and chops the old ways into new ones. In Notes on Trap, he borrows a conceit from Susan Sontag to reveal the social and political significance of trap music, the drug-soaked strain of Southern hip-hop that, as he puts it, is the funeral music that the Reagan Revolution deserves. In Back in the Day, McCarthy, a black American raised in France, evokes his childhood in Paris through an elegiac account of French rap in the 1990s. In The Master's Tools, the relationship between Spanish painter Diego Velázquez and his acolyte slave, Juan de Pareja, becomes the lens through which Kehinde Wiley's paintings are viewed, while To Make a Poet Black explores the hidden blackness of Sappho and the erotic power of Phyllis Wheatley. Essays on John Edgar Wideman, Claudia Rankine, and Colson Whitehead survey the state of black letters. In his title essay, McCarthy takes on the question of reparations, arguing that progress will not come until Americans remake their institutions in the service of true equality. As he asks, what can reparations mean when the damage cannot be accounted for in the only system of accounting that a society recognizes? For readers of Teju Cole's Known and Strange Things and Mark Grief's Against Everything, McCarthy's essays portray a brilliant young critic at work, making sense of our disjointed times while seeking to transform our understanding of race and art, identity and representation. And the last one for today is called Nuclear Folly, A History of the Cuban Missile Crisis by Serhii Plokhy. Nearly 30 years after the end of the Cold War, today's world leaders are abandoning disarmament treaties, building up their nuclear arsenals, and exchanging threats of nuclear strikes. To survive this new atomic age, we must relearn the lessons of the most dangerous moment of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Serhii Plokhy's Nuclear Folly offers an international perspective on the crisis, tracing the torturous decision-making that produced and then resolved it, which involved John Kennedy and his advisors, Nikita Khrushchev, Fidel Castro, and their commanders on the ground. In breathtaking detail, Plokhy vividly recounts the young JFK being played by the canny Khrushchev, the hot-headed Castro willing to defy the USSR and threatening to align himself with China, the Soviet troops on the ground clearing jungle foliage in the tropical heat, and desperately trying to conceal nuclear installations on Cuba, which were nonetheless easily spotted by U-2 spy planes, and the hair-raising near misses at sea that nearly caused a Soviet nuclear-armed submarine to fire its weapons. More often than not, the Americans and Soviets misread each other, operated under false information, and came perilously close to nuclear catastrophe. Despite these errors, nuclear war was ultimately avoided for one central reason: fear, and the realization that any escalation on either the Soviets or the Americans' part would lead to mutual destruction. Drawing on a range of Soviet archival sources, including previously classified KGB documents, as well as White House tapes, Plokhy masterfully illustrates the drama and anxiety of those tense days, and provides a way for us to grapple with the problems posed in our present day. Okay, there's today's group of 10 books. I'll be back again in a couple of days, hopefully, with another list of 10 books. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.